Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm going to tell you here, before we get started, I'm in kind of a casual mood today, so we're going to be kind of casual here in our program. We're going to do a lot of the same stuff we typically do, but the one thing that's going to be a little bit different is I'm going to make a little bit more room for some comments today. I'm just kind of in the mood to hear from y'all and let you talk, and we'll just kind of do what we do, as they say. Sometimes we'll chop it up a little bit here on the program. We're also going to have kind of a weird schedule. I've got a fun guest coming on a little bit later on. His name is David Kleininger. He covers the South Carolina Gamecocks. We're going to do a little bit of a preview of this Saturday's game, but we're also going to do that kind of much later than we normally do, kind of after the end of our R.S. Andrews cool down. So we'll have kind of an odd schedule for the most part. You may hear me preview Kleininger in a moment, but obviously at that point in time, I'm going to spread things out and take some of your comments. So this is one of those days, and every now and then we do this. For whatever reason, it seems like we end up doing this on a Thursday, maybe more so than other days. But we are going to, almost like Pulp Fiction, kind of do this one out of order just a bit and kind of piece it all back together before it's all said and done. And if you want to, later on, you can check out the podcast or the radio show on 960 The Ref, and you kind of hear what it sounds like when we put the pieces back together. But what matters to you is a lot of your comments, a lot of time for us to interact, and hopefully today we'll have a pretty long, wide window. I know some of you say we haven't taken enough comments lately, so hopefully today we'll have kind of a nice, long, wide window to be able to do as much of that as we possibly can. I'm also going to begin the show today by being extraordinarily candid about a subject. I'll be curious to see how this lands with all of you. I'm going to do that. I'm going to tell you on today's show why Georgia, in terms of explosiveness, might be a little closer to being there than maybe some of us give them credit for from time to time. And before we're done, I think this is a really interesting comparison. I'm going to play you two pieces of audio from Kirby Smart about essentially the same subject, but very different perspectives on both sides of an issue, kind of both sides of the coin. I'm not sure there's a right or a wrong answer here, but I do think when you hear the words from Kirby Smart later on, it kind of talks about one of the interesting choices that coaches kind of have to make, and how doing one thing on one side also creates kind of an opportunity or a need on the other side. I think you'll like this. Florida's trying to copy Georgia. I'll tell you about that. We're actually really pretty busy today. A lot of stuff to cover. We'll try to get to it all next. I'm glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Hopefully I've earned the right to be candid with all of you, and I'm going to try to be extraordinarily candid off the top of the program here for a moment. I think most of you that have, even if you don't watch or listen to the show every day, even if you just watch or listen occasionally, I think the one thing that you're probably aware of is around here, we don't really try to do an objective show necessarily in the most literal sense of that word. I've got a Georgia shirt on today. I've never tried to hide the fact that I am a UGA fan. There's a reason why, and you heard the voice guy say that a moment ago, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. There's a reason why I use that phrase every single day on this show. To me, I've always felt like the purpose of DawgNation Daily was to be a show for fans. Therefore, objectivity has never been that important to me for the show. I also think objectivity is kind of an overrated thing in life in general. I won't bore you with my feelings on that, but maybe one day over a cup of coffee, I'll explain all that to you. I just think the notion of objectivity is kind of overrated. However, with that said, the one thing I've always tried not to do, though, while I don't promise objectivity, I don't deliver objectivity, the one thing I don't want to do is be biased. Now, once again, I'm not using the word bias necessarily in the most literal sense here, because we all have biases. Some of them are obvious. Some of them are a little bit more subconscious. We all have biases. When I use that word, what I mean is I don't want my fandom for Georgia to impact my ability to see the truth, or my ability to kind of convey the truth to you the best I understand it, right? We all know what the idea of red and black colored glasses might be. We all know what the idea of wanting to see the best for, whether it be your own family, your favorite sports team, your favorite politician, whatever else. We kind of all know sort of a version of bias when we see it, that we're so kind of into the subject or so in love with the idea that we can't really see anything else. So objectivity, I think, is overrated. Bias to the point that it kind of clouds your ability to see the truth is not really a good thing. Now, you may be wondering why in the world I'm bringing all this up. Because looking back on things over the last 24 hours, there is a chance that me, Georgia fan, who does a show for other Georgia fans, there is a chance I've let a little bit of bias creep into something that I've talked to you guys quite a bit about over the last couple of years. And I'll tell you why I come to think about this. So some of you who are watching or listening to me right now are Braves fans, and some of you are not. I'm not going to talk a ton about the baseball game yesterday because we have a huge pocket of our audience that doesn't care about baseball or has a different favorite baseball team or whatever. It's not all universal that people who cheer for the University of Georgia also cheer for the professional sports teams in Georgia. That's not a universal idea among our audience. I happen to be a Georgia fan who's also a Braves fan, and Braves took a terrible, heartbreaking, just embarrassing, obliterated loss yesterday at the hands of the St. Louis Cardinals. And in the aftermath of a lot of this kind of stuff, there is a lot of chatter about what else is happening for some other Atlanta sports teams too. The Atlanta Falcons lost the Super Bowl a couple years ago. You, of course, remember how embarrassing that was to be up 28-3 and lose the game. But even last night on SportsCenter, when they're kind of doing the retrospective and all of this, the Georgia thing kind of comes up. Georgia lost the national championship in Alabama. Other people will bring up the fact that Georgia also lost the SEC championship to Alabama. And in terms of like sports teams from Georgia who have choked, Georgia is included in that. And on this show, a lot of times, you may have even heard me say this, I've tried to make the case for the fact that that really wasn't Georgia's story, that Georgia doesn't belong in the same category of the Falcons losing a 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl, or I would have even said before yesterday, the Braves losing 10 straight playoff series. Georgia's situation is different. Yes, Georgia had a lead on Alabama in the 2017 national championship game, and yes, they went on to lose that game. Yes, that's true, but that's not a choke. I would have said the same thing about the SEC championship a year ago. Yes, Georgia had a lead in this game once again, and yes, they lost the game, but that's not a choke. I've even gone so far as saying that the close games that Georgia has played with Alabama are actually proof of this being a team on the ascent and not the kind of thing that you have to sort of apologize for, the way that the Falcons would have to apologize for 28-3 and the way the Braves have to apologize for every playoff series since some of you have been alive. I've always kind of held Georgia out from that discussion, that Georgia doesn't belong in that. But when you see the social media activity over the last 24 hours, and when you see, the people on TV, people, other walks of life and media, kind of including Georgia in this discussion, I guess I have to at least be open to the possibility that maybe I'm just seeing something here that everybody else is not. Maybe the person who admittedly I am, someone who wants the best for Georgia, maybe that desire to want the best for Georgia is clouding my ability to see what other people seem to see, which is that Georgia choked against Alabama in last year's SEC championship game and against Alabama again in the 2017 national championship game. And if you want to bring in the 2012 SEC championship game, which predates all these players and the coaching staff here as well, maybe that's just kind of what's going on here. And if that is true, then that is going to impact the way that fans experience the 2019 season while it's going on. I at least have to be open to the possibility that's what's taking place here. Now, this is, of course, a big topic of conversation during the offseason, the notion of getting over the hump. Georgia being close to Alabama, losing some games when it mattered most, close to Clemson, not getting the opportunity to play the Tigers because it couldn't get over that Alabama hump, I should say. That was a big topic of conversation during the offseason. Kirby Smart forced to talk about that a bunch of different ways. In fact, if you want to go back to the summer, now the audio quality on this is not great because some of these summer tour stops aren't always necessarily in perfectly confined studios. But Smart did address the notion of, what it's going to take to get over the hump and maybe, although he doesn't use these words, not choke in a big game like Alabama where it matters most. Here is Kirby Smart.
You talk about a hump, you think about the little things that you can do better, the details, whether it's create turnovers. There's so many statistics that we can improve in that it's hard to pinpoint just one thing. I'm certainly excited about this team. I'm excited about the guys we got coming back. I love their work ethic. I love the spring we had, and I'm just excited to be able to coach them.
So I think that's really good stuff there from Kirby Smart saying, basically there's a lot of little things that need to be done to get over the hump against a team like Alabama and Clemson. But one of the reasons why Smart's forced to talk about that there then is because of everything that has been said around him since last year's SEC championship and since last year's national championship. And at a certain point in time, maybe I have to at least be open to the idea that some of the critics of Smart or some of the observers of Georgia who are a little cynical after Georgia's let a couple big games get away, maybe that is a little bit of a cloud that hangs over this program right now, and maybe it's more than I've wanted to admit it was. Let me give you an example from a guy I have respect for, and a guy that's not a Georgia hater by any stretch of the imagination. I've talked about this before going back to the summer, but do you remember when Booger McFarland, who's the Monday Night Football analyst now, but back in the summer we addressed the fact that he goes on the Feinbaum show and the subject of Georgia comes up. And as I said before, it's one thing if it's a Georgia hater who says this, someone who's made a living off picking on SEC teams or trolling Georgia. Y'all, that's not what Booger is. That's never been what he is at all. He's kind of a straight shooter, and if anything, a guy that's got, at least based on some of his previous statements, a guy who's got great respect for Kirby Smart. But when he made an appearance on the Feinbaum show this summer, he kind of laid out what some people seem to feel like they've noticed, which are those problems that Georgia has had, much like some of the Atlanta professional teams in some of the big games. Here's what McFarland said on the Feinbaum show. I'll read the quote to you. He says, Kirby Smart's done a phenomenal job. I know he's got everyone's faith in Athens. This is from the Feinbaum show, Booger McFarland. He's recruiting like Alabama and Clemson. He's just not winning like them yet. McFarland goes on to say the people in Athens are waiting. They aren't going to say a lot, not going to ruffle any feathers, but I think they're waiting to see. Can you win that? And this is a very interesting phrase that McFarland uses on the Feinbaum show. He says, can you win that big game and start playing for national championships? That's Booger McFarland going back to the Feinbaum show back during the summer. And I think what McFarland says there does pretty well capsulize, maybe even crystallize, the feeling that a lot of Georgia fans have. Wow, close to getting over the hump, but not quite getting it done in that big game. Now, Kirby Smart, to his credit, has kind of made seemingly a response to that the focal point for the season. It's why back in the winter they were already talking about do more and kind of everything that goes along with that. And so if you've got some, in McFarland's case, I don't even want to say critics, but if you've got some people who doubt you, if you've got some people who wonder about you, I think the mentality that Georgia brought into the season, I think is a pretty good way to set yourself up to respond to that. And Kirby's been pretty open about talking about it. In fact, here's an example from July where he sort of addressed this issue head on, Kirby again.
One of the themes our players have adopted this year has been to do more. It's a great theme because it's simple. We like it because we understand how close we've been to taking the next step. And although 24-5 the last two seasons is good, it's not good enough. It's not where we expect to be at the University of Georgia. Our mission is to bridge that gap, by the actions we take, hence the word do more. Those words require action. And I heard a quote coming in here. I read a quote coming in this morning that really grabbed me, and I'm not a big quote guy, but when I heard this quote, I thought that's something that our players can relate to. Life has no remote. You've got to get up and change it yourself. And if you think about that, so many of us want to take the easy way out, whether it's changing the channel with a remote or anything else, not doing the work that has to be done. We want to do more at the University of Georgia. We're not complacent in what we've done, and we know we need to take that next step. And for us, pressure is a reflection of ambition. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves day in and day out. The stress and pressure we feel emanates from our building, from our coaches, from our players putting it on each other, from our university. We apply it every day.
So listen, here to me is the good news on this. If you've got a national media saying you haven't won the big games and reminding you of that over and over again, if you've got trolling fans who say you can't win the big game because of your recent past, the response you just got from your head coach going back to the summer on this same topic is exactly what you'd want it to be. However, there's also the byproduct of this, which is that for the fans themselves, this creates a lot of anxiety about every little moment during the season. We talked about this going back to Monday, where every game that Georgia plays that's a little bit closer than it should be for even just a few minutes, all of a sudden fans start to worry and wonder, is this some sort of harbinger of what's also going to happen when Georgia plays the games that matter most in 2019? You remember the clip that I played from Jake Fromm going back to Monday about the advice that he got before that game? Let me let you hear that as a way of just kind of wrapping this up here. That Fromm had to remind himself of something pretty important going into the game against Tennessee. Let me let you hear Jake quickly here.
A lot of people challenged me to have fun tonight, and so that's what I want to do. I want to go out and have fun, whether it was 10-14, 13-14, whatever the score was. I was going to go out and have fun. I think the guys around me just made that easy for me. We were making plays and we were moving the ball on offense, and it's fun.
So I said on Monday's show that the advice that Fromm got is probably good advice for Georgia fans too. Just go out there and have fun. Or as fans, travel to the games and enjoy the games. Appreciate the fact that you beat a rival. Appreciate the fact that we only get 12 of these regular season games. And enjoy the process every step of the way. But admittedly, for the fans who care probably the most about this program, the recent past does hang over a little bit like a dark cloud. And I guess I'm not quite sure what you do about all of that, but it's probably fair for me to acknowledge that it's true. Maybe even more true than I've admitted in the past. That the closeness of the 2017 national championship game is a heartbreak for fans. And the similarities to that game, the 2018 SEC championship, also a bit of a heartbreaker there as well. Now, I am still optimistic and confident this 2019 team can change that narrative. But until it does happen, a lot of fans are going to be a little bit white-knuckled and biting their fingernails about every single moment up until that time. However, I will leave you with something positive. I'll explain this coming up in a moment. The fact is, Georgia getting that done and doing what needs to be done to make that happen this year, that may be closer to occurring than you might think. We'll get to that more coming up in just a moment, but first let me remind you that my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us today. No matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., the DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter on the video side of things, radio noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, the Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player, world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really, really glad to have you with us. Let me say a couple quick things here, and then I want to kind of get back to the topic we were just discussing. Tomorrow, I'm really excited about making a big announcement. I know I kind of teased this at the end of one of our shows this week and ended up not doing it, but tomorrow I have been given the clearance that by tomorrow, one way or another, I'm going to be able to unveil to all of you some really big plans for the upcoming game against Florida. And there is something that some of y'all have been asking for that is coming back. It is on its way back. I will tell you about that tomorrow, tell you how you can be a part of this. This is going to be really, really fun, and I can't wait to share all of that with you. Before we get to that and do anything else on today's program, let me also go around the doghouse here for a moment. It's brought to you today by our friends at Online Trading Academy. And if you're kind of just joining us either on the radio or if you're, a little bit late getting to the video, podcast folks for the most part, listen all the way through. What we were talking about before is, I guess, the admission on my part that maybe I haven't given enough credence to the idea that Georgia may have choked away a couple games here recently that it should have won, and that the national media reminds you of something like that from time to time, and maybe I need to sort of take that idea a little bit more head on. I think about that because my baseball team, the Braves, lost yesterday. A lot of people kind of lump that Brave story with the Georgia story and with the Falcon story, and it's kind of all kind of put in there together as kind of a Georgia sports curse, which you can believe in or not. It's not my place to address that one way or another. But the topic we deal with here is on the Georgia side of things, and I guess the question that all this leads to is, well, if it really is true that Georgia has not, as Booger McFarland said, won the big game, or to use Kirby Smart's phrasing here, has not done more yet, what do you do about that? What do you do to prevent the close loss a little bit later on in the games that matter, SEC championships, national championships, everything in between? I really think there's only one cure for this. I think you got to go out there and just dominate your opponent. I think you've got to, and college football in modern times is the perfect example of this. You got to score 50 points a game on offense, and you've got to hold your opponent to like 10 points. I mean, for as much as people want to make a big deal of Alabama having gotten by Georgia in close games recently, look at the full total of Alabama under Nick Saban. I mean, how many close national championship games have they really played? How many close SEC championship games have they really played? I mean, if you look at the Alabama games when it has mattered, BCS title, SEC championship, college football playoff, when they haven't won by at least 14 points, the Crimson Tide's overall record in those games is not going to be that great. That the way to win close games is to simply avoid them. The way to win close games is to simply go out and annihilate your opponent and not give him any chance to take advantage of a miscue from you late in the game, which has kind of befuddled Georgia in the last two meetings with the Crimson Tide, and as longtime Georgia fans might remember, in the 2012 national championship. Now, the good news in all of this is that I believe that Georgia's actually a little closer to getting this done than maybe some of its fans have given it credit for. To go back to Monday's topic about why some UGA fans have a hard time having a lot of fun when Georgia's in a closer game against Tennessee than they hope for, because maybe they're worried their team's not going to be able to get it done when it matters most here this season. However, the deeper stats on this tell a story that the kind of dominance you need to avoid close games altogether, Georgia's not as far off on that as you might think. Let me show you a stat from a statistician who I mentioned from time to time in our program. His name is Brian Freemo. He writes for Football Outsider. He's got his own kind of personal blog there as well. And one of the stats that he keeps up with are points per drive. That means for every drive you have, take that number and divide that into the total number of points you score, and that's a measure of your offensive explosiveness. How many points are each of your drives worth? You can do the same thing for defense, the points you allow per drive. Now, according to Freemo, and if you're watching on video, you obviously see the tweet on your screen, he says there are only 4 teams right now who are in the top 10 in America in terms of points per drive scored on offense and points per drive allowed on defense. And for the most part, these are the schools you'd expect to be. Alabama's first in offense, 8th in defense. Ohio State's 4th offensively, 2nd defensively. Interesting that the Buckeyes defense outpacing its offense right now. Maybe the one somewhat outlier here is Wisconsin, who is 5th offensively, 1st defensively. And Georgia is the 4th team on this list. It's 6th in both categories. 6th in points per drive offense, 6th in points per drive allowed defense. So if you've heard everything I've said up to this point in time and you kind of wonder where this leaves Georgia going into the season, I think it still leaves Georgia in pretty good shape. Admittedly, as a fan, I've probably got to have a little bit of a reckoning with the fact that when you get as close as Georgia has gotten to the really big win the last couple of years and didn't get it, there is a little bit of a cloud that hangs over your head after that. But Georgia seemingly has the perfect mentality for going out there and dealing with that. And if it really is true, my theory about close games, that the way to win them is to avoid them, and the way to win them is to go out and dominate and vanquish your opponent from the very beginning, then statistically speaking, Georgia's doing that right now as about as well as anybody in the country is. And that the notion that somehow the bad memories of the last couple of years will somehow be inside the helmets and inside the heads of the Georgia players when they play those kinds of games this year, I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case. Certainly doesn't have to be the case. And despite the fact that a lot of my other teams have lost plenty of games when they mattered most, I don't have that same worry when it comes to Georgia in that spot this year. So we'll see how it plays out. It's Around the Doghouse. It's brought to you by our friends at Online Trading Academy. And the one thing we all want is more money. And I think we somehow have an idea that the way to get that money is to let the markets work for you. But that means knowing how to invest. And you say, well, where do you even begin when it comes to investing? I think the best decision you can make when it comes to investing is to take this simple step first. Invest in yourself. Start to learn more about those markets. And that's what Online Trading Academy provides the chance for you can do. You can learn how to make the markets work no matter which direction they might be moving. Online Trading Academy provides a chance for you to learn in the classroom and online, so there's a lot of different learning styles being accommodated there, and you can learn about the various asset classes, all the trading styles that are out there. It's just a wealth of knowledge you can have at your fingertips. But in order to get this for yourself and start putting more money in your pocket, you got to go to this website. It's tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. That's Trading Academy with a D, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta, and it's great to have Online Trading Academy as a part of DawgNation Daily. All right, later on in today's show, I'm going to talk about a pretty interesting coaching decision that Kirby Smart has consistently made over the course of his time here at Georgia. And I'm going to talk about both sides of the coin that come up because of that. Really interesting audio from Kirby this week. I'll play that for you. But for now, for more of a preview on the Dogs and Gamecocks coming up on Saturday, let's talk to David Cloninger, who covers the Gamecocks, the Charleston Post and Courier. It's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily. All right, we're going to get David here in just a moment, and we're going to talk to him about the Gamecocks. I told our video audience who kind of got here with us at the beginning, we're going to do things a little bit weird today. The one good thing is we're going to have plenty of time to take as much of your comments as we can. We'll update George on some key injuries here before we're done. And as I said before, I think you're going to like this Kirby audio coming up because I think it takes both sides of a, pretty central issue facing modern college football teams. And I think Kirby's pretty introspective on both parts of that, so we'll do a lot of that with you all coming up. But before we get there, I want to take a lot of your comments on any subject you want to get to. You want to address some of the stuff off the top of the show. You want to go in a different direction. You get a chance to kind of do all of that today. And we will give you a chance to just kind of have free reign over the content here for the next little bit. And, of course, as I said before, I'm always very happy to have you as a part of DawgNation Daily. Let's see what else is going on. Dante Edie says a choke is a choke. Just get it done. That probably reflects the feelings of a lot of Georgia fans for sure. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Lavelle Hughes on the subject of the Georgia strategy says we need more downhill running with a fullback and watch the train start going. Our backs can hit a hole hard. And Lavelle, I said that after watching the Monday Night Football game a little bit. Kyle Shanahan running that San Francisco 49ers offense. He's always seemingly used fullbacks well. And when you watch a game like that, kind of a high-profile prime-time spot, you were left to think, boy, I do think for Georgia trying to do the pro-style stuff that it does, a fullback in there every now and then, I don't mind that idea at all. I don't mind that whatsoever. Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin celebrating fire pit and red wine weather. That's pretty funny there from her. Adrian Carver says, why is it that Clemson and Bama can start slow and their fan bases don't give it a thought? We take a quarter to figure it out, and our team's offense starts scoring and our fans start wringing their hands and turning over furniture. It's time to start believing in our team. Guys, we're really good now, I promise. I think that's a really good comment from Adrian. I think here's the problem, and I think that's what the point I'm kind of building to based on what we started the show with today. I think the problem here just a bit is that for teams like Georgia, different than Alabama and Clemson, who've won championships in the recent years, Georgia, because of that, is going to be a little bit guilty until proven innocent, and that's what ultimately all this leads to. And for a certain pocket of the fan base, Georgia and its ability to win a national championship or its inability to win a national championship is going to be guilty until proven innocent. There's going to be a significant doubt among some fans that's simply not going to go away until they see it with their own eyes. And you can say, well, fans need to be more optimistic than that, and fans need to be more positive than that. You can say whatever you want to in response to that pocket of fans, but you're not going to make it disappear. You're just not. It's just a fact. Now, overall, I think that positivity and happy thoughts are probably the best way to go through life in general. But in terms of the more cynically minded fan who's not going to believe it until they see it, I just don't think you can wave a magic wand and make that idea disappear. And I think that's the kind of the thing we're kind of dealing with off the top there. Let's see what else is going on here. Kerry Strickland says, Kirby Smart said games 5 through 7 will determine what kind of team we have. And yeah, I think you're kind of seeing that right now. And you're right, Gary. Kirby talked about that a little bit earlier. So it was Tennessee last week, a chance to get some experience for some guys who you're going to need to use more later on. Good chance for DJ Daniel to be in there and playing and being involved. You're able to work Julian Rochester back into the mix a little bit more. You kind of like to see that. You're able to continue to get a guy like Justin Schaefer involved. So ultimately, you end up getting by a scoring margin an easy victory against Tennessee. And while doing so, you also got some pretty good experience for guys who needed it. George Pickens got a touchdown. That's going to be a key weapon for Jake Fromm later on in the season. More chances to build on that against South Carolina and against Kentucky. These are the proving grounds, not just for determining how good Georgia's going to be, but how ready Georgia is for the real proving ground of the games that will determine the fate of their season. You get better right now, that's your opportunity. And the fact that Georgia gets to do that against SEC competition on the road last week, at home for the next 2 weeks, I think that's a pretty good luxury. Justin Glaze asked about McBride as a fullback in 1-yard packages. So I said before that I do like the idea of maybe I think McBride is anywhere close to being the most likely candidate to be that fullback. Remember, McBride's SEC, I'm saying, but McBride's on the Georgia roster because of how well he runs. If he were going to play a position other than linebacker, it'd probably be a position designed to take more advantage of his speed. The fullback, that's probably not quite what that is. Matthew McGay, he says we need to turn Zeus loose, and I think for a lot of Georgia fans, the fact they got a little bit of a glimpse of that against Tennessee is something they're hoping for more of against South Carolina. I think that Georgia is at its best when it's the ensemble of running backs, when it's at least 3 of them. I know Dante Edey mentioned a moment ago the way that Georgia's not using James Cook right now, and I think ultimately, unfortunately, what I said during the offseason is now starting to prove itself to be true. That when you're playing Murray State and Arkansas State, it's kind of easy to play 4 guys. When you're playing overmatched Vanderbilt, it's going to be easy to play 4 guys at that position. But over the course of a season, it's really hard to keep 4 guys involved at the running back spot. But you can keep 3 guys involved, and there's going to be an odd man out there. That doesn't mean that guy's a bad player. It's been Brian Harry in the last couple of years who ended up being the odd man out, among the odd men out. And obviously, Harrion is certainly a variation of Swift, White, and Harrion who were involved there, and obviously trying to find a way to be creative with James Cook, who's still on the field sometimes as kind of a slot-type guy or a 2 running back set, depending on how you want to define that. He's still on the field some. Maybe they need to use him more. When it comes to the primary ball carriers, I believe it's going to be Swift. I believe it's going to be White. I believe it's going to be Harrion. And finding a way, because of their differing running styles, to keep all 3 of those guys involved, I ultimately think that's the best for Georgia. Jeffrey Lovely says, put Cade Mays at fullback, Harrion or Zeus, and let's see if we can pick up 4th and 1. Yeah, I think if Georgia started playing with more of a fullback for right now anyway, based on the current makeup of their roster, they'd probably be more likely to use one of those extra offensive linemen. Maybe not Mays because he's one of your first 5 typically, but one of those guys kind of like that. In fact, for those of you who watch games really closely, and a lot of times this isn't announced before the game, you just have to sort of notice this on the sideline, Georgia will have a lineman wearing number 40-something. It's been Justin Schaefer before. It's not right now because of the fact that he's playing offensive line. In fact, I think Schaefer may have been wearing 42 before he entered for Solomon Kinley after Kinley got hurt the other night. Let me go over to YouTube here for a moment. Can I see what's happening over there? And of course, we'll still do our extended R.S. Andrews cool down a little bit later on. We just wanted to make some room for some additional comments here today as a part of this show. Let's see what's going on. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell on YouTube what's going on. Green Soldier says Alabama's got serious questions at offensive line, defensive back, inside linebacker, special teams. So, yeah, I mean, obviously the next couple of weeks are going to be major proving grounds for who's got what. Alabama goes on the road on Saturday as a 17-point favorite. And one way or another, now I expect Alabama to coast probably against Texas A&M because, as I've explained in some of our shows before, A&M just has not typically, in recent years, been very good at defending its own turf in what's supposed to be a high-profile home game. Lost to Auburn in that spot a couple of weeks ago, as a for instance. So does Alabama look like a more solid, complete team, a little bit more committed to the run? Obviously, A&M doesn't run the ball very much at all. If Alabama abandons that as well, it could turn into kind of a weird situation where both these teams now can tend to play kind of a track meet style game. Now, with Alabama's quarterbacks and wide receivers, you'd think they have a pretty significant advantage there. But in terms of completely vanquishing an opponent and giving them no signs of life, you'd obviously be able to. Let me try this one more time. You would obviously like to be able to round out and be a little bit more defensive minded, be a little bit more running game oriented. So we'll see if Alabama's able to pull that off against Texas A&M on Saturday. Mike D says we had a struggle win because of 3 bad special teams plays against Notre Dame. We dominated that team and made adjustments. Take away the 3 stupid plays, we win 35-7. Mike D may be right about that. Ooh, how about this from J. Corey Hood? Strong prediction. He says Bama loses by 3 this weekend, and Kellen Mond has a coming out party. That's quite a prediction, Jay. Pretty good job on that. Let's see what else is going on. Boy, G. Grace getting everybody stirred up over here. Everybody stirred up over here. That's amazing. That is amazing. Let me go back over to Facebook for a moment and see if some order can be restored to the YouTube comment section. Jeff Boyle on the subject of Georgia punting. Yeah, we've addressed that a good bit here. That is a problem that Georgia is going to have to figure out something to do. And I've supported Camarda. I actually think that Camarda is a talented kicker, but obviously he's not having a lot of success right now. At this point in time, I'm not quite sure that you can remedy that during the season, because if someone was going to overtake Camarda for that job, I believe it would have already happened. And so now I think the responsibility is on Kirby Smart in terms of strategically how you do this. And I said this during our comment section yesterday. I'll repeat it now. If Alabama can win a national championship with a very shaky place kicker, then that shouldn't preclude Georgia from being able to do the same thing with a shaky punter. We had a Green Soldier a moment ago mention some vulnerabilities for Alabama. The truth is everyone's got some imperfections. Everyone's got some blemishes. I think the job of a coach is to coach in such a way that you coach around what could be a flaw and prevent it from turning into a fatal flaw. So it kind of is what it is for Georgia. There are some areas in which you say, wow, Georgia probably does this as well as any team in the country. There are some areas when you say, wow, on the right moment, or I should say the wrong moment, wrong time, this could get Georgia beat. And you just got to try to find a way to avoid that. But in this situation, that doesn't make Georgia any different than any other team. The other team's issues might not be punting, but everybody's got some issue they're trying to kind of hide from the rest of college football. Pete Williams says practice punts, and more punts. No doubt there's a lot of practicing going on. Cal Norton says Kirby needs to take the leash off the defense and let them play mad this week instead of conservative. Run up the score and make a statement. Here's the one thing I'm going to say. And, Kyle, you can believe me or you can disbelieve me, and that's fine either way. When you look at the scheme that Georgia's playing defensively, when you look at the personnel that Georgia has on the field, especially on third down, hard for me to say that Georgia's playing defensively very conservative right now. I mean, if you've still got the Tennessee game on your DVR, or if you've got the Notre Dame game on your DVR, just fast forward to the moments in which Georgia's in a third down situation. Now, especially against Tennessee, they'd moved Trayvon Walker, who had been kind of playing more of an outside defensive lineman on third down against Notre Dame. He was playing like over the center on third down against Tennessee. So you got Walker as a pass rushing interior defensive lineman. You've got Nakobe Dean on the field. You've got Nolan Smith on the field. You've got Adam Anderson, who's essentially a designated pass rusher. And Georgia, the best I could tell, was sending about 5 pass rushers on every single third down with the kind of athletes you'd want on the field. So Georgia's pass rush is still a bit of a work in progress. Azeez Ojulari's been terrific. Other guys still kind of trying to round into form. But the one thing I don't think you can say is, I don't think you can say that Georgia hasn't been aggressive in pursuing that. They're like just a second away. And in college football, especially the SEC level, a second can be a big difference. They're about a second away from getting there on some of this kind of stuff. So if you can be a little bit more physical with your defensive backs, if you can pop those wide receivers just a little bit more to create a little bit more space for your pass rush to get there, maybe that second means all the difference, makes all the difference in the world. But in terms of Georgia and the honest truth is, I want to say they're at 15 sacks in 5 games. They're actually on pace for a pretty good sack total as it is. But in terms of just really dominating opponents of the pass rush, maybe you could say there's more they could do against that, given the fact they did get a lot of sacks against one of the overmatched opponents they played. If you want to see more against high-level FBS competition, I don't think you can blame that on the scheme, and I don't think you can blame that on the personnel in the game. Georgia's got its best athletes on the field, especially in third down situations. They're trying to bring the heat. They're just not quite getting there as of yet. So, like I said, Kyle, you can believe that or choose to believe something different, but that's my opinion on that. Drew Odom says, tired of hearing Fromm is not as good as Tua or Burrow. Their offenses are not the same. Like comparing stats from the air raid to the triple option just doesn't make sense. The one thing I don't believe, though, Drew, and once again, this is something you can choose to believe or not, I don't believe that Georgia is intentionally trying to play a lower scoring game or intentionally trying to produce less offensive output. That's not what I believe. Now, Georgia does play slower than some teams. I don't know that it plays all that dramatically slower than Alabama and LSU do now, but they do play slower than some teams do. So in terms of comparing the teams who really are getting off 80 or 90 plays per game, it's more interesting to look at Georgia on a per-play basis. And per-play basis, Georgia's actually doing pretty well. Yards per play, points per drive, things like that. I even cited some of those stats before we kind of got going with this comment section during the show. On that basis, Georgia is actually doing pretty well. So last year and last couple of years for Georgia on the efficiency metrics, Georgia's been like a top 5 offense on the basis of efficiency. That means how well you do per play, how well you do per drive. Georgia's doing about as well as anybody. The really high yardage totals, for the most part, are coming from teams that are running just a lot more plays than Georgia. But when it comes to points scored and overall productivity, even though Georgia controls its pace a certain way, I don't think it's intentionally trying to limit the productivity that it puts up. That's where I'm a little skeptical of some of what's said in response to some of that. Somebody said that Kirby likes to control the clock. He does. That's one of the reasons why I don't think you see Georgia go no huddle quite as much. It's not a fear of offensive linemen getting injured, as I've heard some people say. I think it's more of an idea of you don't want 330-pound offensive linemen to get fatigued. You can't stay no huddle for an entire game. I say this all the time. There's no free lunch. Even though you can catch defenses kind of in a vulnerability, the more you kind of push the tempo with your own, your big offensive linemen are going to get tired over time. So it's not about avoiding injury for me. It's about avoiding fatigue. And conversely, Kirby Smart is a defensive-minded coach. He's not going to make a lot of decisions that intentionally put his defense in a tougher spot. That's just kind of the fact. However, I don't believe that Georgia's also intentionally trying to play lower score games either. So, kind of some room to discuss that on both sides. Matthew McGahee says our hurry-up offense is effective, though. It is effective. I think what you would see is if you try to do that way for an entire half, I think over time you would see it become less effective because your offensive line are just going to get tired. If teams could run the ball as well as Georgia does, they would. They just would. It is hard to line up and run the ball when a team knows you're going to run it. It's a misleading stat. It gets thrown around the NFL all the time. Teams that run the ball 40 or more times in the NFL win like 80% of the time. Now, that's more of a winning teams run than running teams win type of deal. Because you obviously couldn't just line up and run 40 straight running plays win a game. That's not going to happen. But the point is, the teams that eventually win games in the NFL usually find some success in the running game. And so college football is not all that different. Teams that could run the ball as well as Georgia likely would do that. So Georgia has a strength, even though that it needs to add that extra dimension to the passing game for those close games that we talked about before that matter most. When you go up against an LSU or an Alabama, you've got to be able to have the response to what a good defense does when it tries to take your run away. You've got to be able to have some of that. But ultimately, what Georgia has, a big offensive line that opens holes, and a team like Georgia that produces more than 200 rushing yards essentially every game, trust me, that is the envy of almost all of college football. Tim Griffin says that the hurry-up works until your opponent pretends to be hurt to slow you up or pretends to have a clock malfunction. Some of you would probably also say there as well. Easy Brown says, we've been doing it for years. Everybody knows UGA is going to run the ball. There are moments when it certainly feels that way, but there are also plenty of moments when everyone knows Georgia's going to run the ball and they are powerless to stop it. That's also probably true too as well. You see, you got to give a little bit of credit for that. Christopher Wilson says, this is a really good question. He says, but yeah, I'm not sure if you've answered this, but do you think we should practice not being conservative in these not so big games? That way it's not a desperate and overwhelming surprise when we have to do it in big moments. Christopher, I think there's probably some validity to that. And I think it kind of goes back to what I said before. Georgia has lost a couple of very high-profile big games, and there's no shortage of national media members who want to remind them of that. Ultimately, the way you avoid close games is by, I should say, ultimately the way to win close games is to avoid them. Just dominate your opponents. And so for the Georgia fan who says, yeah, Georgia won 43-14 against Tennessee, but why wasn't it 60-0? There is a part of that that's not totally outlandish to say. That you want to be best offense in the country and you want to be best defense in the country. And obviously, if you're both of those things, then you're going to win most of your games by a wide margin. It's going to be true by the first or second quarter. So from that standpoint, it's not invalid to say that Georgia needs to be a little bit more dominant for 60 minutes than it has been, because when you compare the teams that Georgia's likely to be playing the college football playoff, that is what they are doing. So, yeah, practice in games being a little bit more aggressive, taking more deep shots, I wouldn't mind that. You know, I've been as guilty as anybody saying, and I've even said this going into the game on Saturday, that Georgia probably won't need to throw it too many times, therefore it probably won't. Georgia doesn't need to take too many deep shots down the field, therefore it probably won't. You know, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so being as aggressive against South Carolina as you hope to be against Alabama, Christopher, that's probably a pretty good point, even though I haven't always said that on the show necessarily. Let me go back over to YouTube, see if they've restored any order over here. And Andres Barnes says for next year, 2020, if Fromm stays, it's a guaranteed national championship. I've been on the record as being pretty optimistic about this. And by the way, boy, it's gotten kind of late on me here. I have been on the record as saying that I believe that Georgia, no matter who its quarterback is in 2020, even though there's a very good chance I might not even know that quarterback's name right now, certainly couldn't predict among the guys we think is going to be in the roster, and there's always the chance that a transfer gets involved there. I believe that Georgia is still very much a national championship contender in 2020, whether Fromm's on the team or not. Now you say, well, senior Jake Fromm's going to be better than anybody that Georgia could bring in. That's probably true, but I don't expect some drastic drop-off in Georgia's offensive productivity even without Jake Fromm, as special as he's been here for UGA. So there is certainly an understanding of why this is kind of a do-more year for Georgia. You want to take advantage of the roster that you have right now. But I don't believe the championship window closes for Georgia after 2019 or not. I still think it's very much in place for 2020 as well. So I told you we'd take a lot of comments, and boy, we have. We ran through a bunch right there. We've got more coming up as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. We've also still got David Cloninger to come as a part of a preview of Georgia, South Carolina. I want to deal with a couple things here. I told you I had some good audio coming up from Kirby Smart. We're going to get to that. Florida, kind of copying Georgia a little bit. Certainly a vantage point that gives you a chance to think that anyway. And a little bit of an update on some Georgia injuries. Why don't we get back into the program, and we'll do all of that, and we'll have more of your comments coming up. Of course, it's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily. And here on DawgNation Daily now, it's time for our Ortho Atlanta injury report as we look at everything going on for Georgia against South Carolina from an injury standpoint. Smart providing some updates this week, and we'll give you kind of some of what he had to say about that, both for the positive and maybe the not quite so known on some of this kind of stuff yet. Let me start with Smart from Monday on the subject of Solomon Kinley, on the subject of Tyson Campbell, the current status of them, at least based on where it was at the beginning of the week. Here's what Kirby Smart said about that.
Tyson will be trying to go today. I don't know much because I haven't seen him since the game or since we left for the game and he didn't go. So we're hoping to get him back, but we don't know. I'll know more by the end of the week. And then Solomon should be good. He's cleared to go today. We thought if he had to go in the game, he would have been able to. So he'll be practicing today. And I don't think there's anything else outside of Jordan we talked about. I don't think there's anything else.
We will give you a reminder of what Smart said about Jordan Davis also a little earlier in the week there as well. But on the situation with Solomon Kinley, I'll remind you what happened for the Notre Dame game where Georgia had Isaiah Wilson ready but did not really play him until they felt like they needed him going into the second half. That when it comes to these offensive linemen, Georgia's an even bigger favorite against South Carolina than they were against Notre Dame, that if you have a chance to give these guys more rest, Kinley's a very important part of Georgia's push towards a national championship. If you can get him some more rest on Saturday, that might be the overall decision to make. But Kinley's also a gamer. If he can play, he wants to. At a certain point in time, you hope to get Tyson Campbell back. Difficult to tell kind of how this is going to go for Saturday. Hard to know on that one way or another. I do think that secondary is kind of a chemistry position. But the Georgia secondary, obviously the huge individual play by Eric Stokes, kind of capping on what was a really good game for Stokes individually against the Vols. That's a great thing to be able to see. There were some issues in the first half with Tennessee receivers running free, but Campbell, I believe, is one of Georgia's two top cornerbacks right now. And what you kind of hope for there in that regard is for he and Stokes get some more time playing together to kind of get into a rhythm for how they play with each other. As I said before, I kind of think of secondary as being a little bit of a chemistry position, so watch that closely. Certainly in terms of being really full strength and being at his best. May sound like we're still a little ways away of seeing that from Tyson Campbell, but stay close to DawgNation.com for more of an update on that. By the way, Kirby mentioned Jordan Davis there. I played this for you on Monday, but as a quick reminder, here is the kind of hopeful tone that Smart struck when talking about Davis, who did leave the game against the Vols with an ankle. Kirby on Jordan Davis.
I'll be honest, I didn't see a huge difference when he wasn't out there because the things he impacts are the run game, and we were able to control the run game pretty well. I mean, the play was in there. We actually had a run come out, so we didn't play a run right early in the game when he was in there, and we fit him a lot more right as the game went on. We think Jordan's going to be fine. He's not going to be out there today. Early on, he's going to be rehabbing when you guys are out there, but we think he's going to be fine to go, so we expect him to play.
I think there are two pieces of pretty good news from there on that, what Kirby Smart said. On the one hand, the idea that Davis seems to be on his way back, you love to hear that, but what George was able to do with Davis not in the game, I thought was kind of nice there as well. I do think that Julian Rochester, kind of being that other nose guard option, you want to know who that is. We joked about this before, that Davis is not among the more famous players in the Georgia roster to the casual fans, but in terms of the plugged-in fans, he is on the list of guys you would at least want to see injured. So when he's kind of down on the field, especially not able to put any kind of weight on that ankle as he walked off the field, that gives a little bit of an extra palpitation to UGA fans about what life is like without him. Well, you got a little bit of experience for some of these other guys, Rochester included, on Saturday, and I think the fact that Georgia was able to stymie the Tennessee running game as well as they did overall was a pretty good sign. Vol's not known for being a great running team, but it's one of the things that we kind of question about Georgia coming into the season. Could they be better against the run? Statistically, they were not great a year ago, and thus far against kind of meager rushing game competition, they've been pretty good. South Carolina, historically under Muschamp, and since Brian McClellan's been there, not been great running the ball either, but they've got a couple of, I guess, better backs. I think Rico Daddle's been hurt. He's coming back. Tavian Feaster's obviously the Clemson transfer, so another kind of slight step up in weight class for Georgia in trying to stop the Carolina rushing game on Saturday. With Davis or not, it'll be interesting to see how Georgia continues to try to get that done. It's our Ortho Atlanta Injury Report here on DawgNation Daily. It's brought to you by our friends at Ortho Atlanta with 14 locations throughout Metro Atlanta. They provide orthopedic and sports medicine care for the whole family, including seniors and kids. They've got 39 physicians and over 450 employees dedicated to patient care. A lot of different things you can get for them, whether you're a little leaguer, a weekend warrior, a pro, collegiate athlete, everyone in between. They offer in-house physical therapy, MRI imaging, outpatient surgery, and after-hours orthopedic care. I've told you before that a good orthopedist is the kind of person that can get you back into the game. Ortho Atlanta for you is going to be able to do more than that. They're going to get you back your quality of life. Because if you're like me, those kind of nagging aches and pains, those things that keep you from playing golf or keep you from picking up your kids, your grandkids, or whatever else, those are the kinds of things that really impact your happiness day to day. Well, Ortho Atlanta can get you back, not just in the game, but back doing the things you love again. That's why Dog Nation recommends them. You can find them online at orthoatlanta.com. That's orthoatlanta.com.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, so really good stuff. Let me roll through here our SEC Through. Before we do that, let me remind you about our friends at MyBookie. For those of you that watch our show each week known as Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, one of the things you know is my picks are awful. I mean, just awful. I was 1-7 last week for my picks, which obviously almost anybody can do better than I have done. And that means if you're thinking that person that could do better than me is you got to put your money where your mouth is and get involved with my friends at MyBookie. If you're ready to open up an account, they've even got a great incentive for you to do that here today, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. So let me walk you through this step by step. Type MyBookie into your browser, MyBookie. And when you get into the website, use the promo code DawgNation, all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, with a DAWG. And then after that, you get a big first deposit bonus. You can get your first deposit doubled. You can get up to $1,000 first deposit bonus. So there is really good savings for you. You're essentially a winner before you even place your first bet. That's a great thing to take advantage of when you open up an account with MyBookie. But you've got to find them online. Type MyBookie into your browser. Use the promo code DawgNation. Then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. It is as simple as that with our friends at MyBookie. So a couple things I want to address here as part of our SEC Through for a moment. I thought this was pretty interesting. So Florida has a football equipment Twitter account the same way virtually everybody else does. And their football Twitter account, equipment Twitter account, tweeted out this thing about getting new pants. I don't have the video to show you. Maybe one of these days we'll show it to you. I don't have that for you today, but they've got the white pants, they got the blue pants, and things we were used to seeing Florida wearing. Florida's gotten to be where they wear a different uniform seemingly every game, and I'm sure they think that's just really, really cool and special. But you know, last week, biggest home game of the year for them, they're wearing the old throwback uniforms. It's like at some point in time, do you have a brand worth protecting when you're always wearing something different? But nonetheless, I'm obviously a Gator hater, so take that with a grain of salt. But if you're watching the video closely, as they're kind of flipping through these pants, which are in a stack in the equipment trailer or closet, whatever you want to call it, they show some black pants. Black pants, Gator green, the blue on there, whatever else. And that got the Florida fans all abuzz that Florida was going to wear black at LSU on Saturday. Remember, LSU historically wears white for its home game, so Florida, if it wanted to wear a full alternate uniform, could probably do that. This thing got so blown up for a moment, some of the Florida media got involved on this, that Gators athletic director Scott Strickland had to take to Twitter and say that no, they were not wearing black here this week. This leaves me with a lot of questions. You're going on the road as a 13-point underdog, and why are your fans even worried about uniforms anyway? Just go win the game or try to win the game or whatever. Stop worrying about uniforms. Second of all, and I hate to sound 1,000 years old here because I know at this point in time everybody's got a black uniform, but am I wrong for pointing out that Florida's school colors are not black? They're the ugliest, version of orange and blue you've ever seen. They're not black. I mean, how much are they trying to be something they're not when they're going to institute these black uniforms, apparently at some point in time, because they're clearly showing them off? This to me just comes across, and Mullen does this kind of stuff all the time, this to me comes across as trying too hard. I don't know if they, break this stuff out of the Georgia game or what. This is also the same school a couple years ago that wore those ugly swamp things. So obviously for Florida, when it comes to uniforms, you can't put anything past them. But overall, that's not a very good job to me. So Florida fans are all in a tizzy about black uniforms. They are apparently trying to be like Georgia, whose fans also spend time worrying about black uniforms. Now, in Georgia's case, they end up not wearing the uniforms. We'll see if Florida actually follows through and eventually wears these things in the game, but we shall see. By the way, speaking of the Gators, they do go to LSU on Saturday. Pretty interesting note from the Bear Chris Felico on this. Last 12 times a ranked team won as an underdog one week and had to play as a underdog again the following week. Those teams just 1-11 in those spots straight up. I mean, they've only won one out of those 12 games and only covered the spread in 4 of those 12 instances. So a little bit of a number arguing against Florida. I think it's really hard to play really well 2 weeks in a row. You can say, well, Florida didn't play that great against Auburn, but they had to expend a lot of emotion to win that. I think that Florida's in some trouble on Saturday, but we shall see where it goes. I think Mississippi State-Tennessee is going to be a pretty interesting game because I think that Tennessee felt like it kind of accomplished some things this past week, kind of figured some stuff out against Georgia, certainly offensively had some things going. I wonder if that's not a false positive, though. I think one of the things that has turned out to be true this year that I didn't expect is the West is better than the East. So when you have a bad West team going against a bad East team, for now I favor the bad West team. Mississippi State's actually a pretty big favorite at Tennessee. I think the Bulldogs are worth the look here. I think that Tennessee may be hoping for something that's not going to come true. A couple other things to get to. Alabama, Texas A&M. I have heard some rumors that maybe five-star running back Zachary Evans, there's some online chatter on this, Evans might end up going to the LSU game on Saturday. There's something really interesting to me about Evans in that there's all these rumors that pop up. It's he's going to commit to Georgia or he's going to visit Texas A&M and he really likes the Tigers and all this kind of stuff. Have you ever noticed that none of these rumors ever seem to involve Texas A&M to the point of it kind of being weird? Not naming the Aggies as a finalist, and yet he's still taking visits there. Not rumored to have committed to them a couple of weeks ago when it seemed like it was Georgia getting that buzz. Not even being rumored to them now. It's LSU getting that buzz. It's almost weird how no one from his camp seemingly ever talks about Texas A&M. Something about that doesn't quite sit right with me. I'm not quite sure what that means, but the sheer absence of A&M talk, and I know there's some, obviously some online people who will say he's going to go to a College Station, but I guess that's kind of in a roundabout way my point. I think obviously the Aggies are in this for him, but the fact that he and the people close to him spend so much time talking up LSU and talking up Georgia, there's something about that. I can't quite figure all that out. Other games to think about this weekend. By the way, I think Alabama rolls probably on Saturday. We'll do more of our official picks tomorrow. But Ole Miss, Missouri, I think is kind of an interesting game. Remember, Missouri still looms for Georgia, still looms for Florida. They're getting better at the right time. Georgia's opponent next week, Kentucky, does take on Arkansas in a home game on Saturday. So we'll pay kind of close attention to all those things with our official picks tomorrow. But that's kind of a look at where the weekend is for right now. And we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, I want to get back to the Georgia Bulldogs for a moment. And one of the things I want to talk about is what I thought was a pretty interesting discussion from Kirby Smart this week on two clips that I think are fairly well connected, although Kirby Smart didn't necessarily mean them to be connected, but I do think it's kind of an interesting byproduct. I've said this before, that one of the things that Georgia, Kirby Smart in particular, is really good at is he seems to substitute in such a way that keeps morale on the team kind of high. And for guys who've been patient enough to wait their turn, they've kind of been rewarded for that. It was Elijah Holyfield at running back last year. I think we're in the midst of seeing that happen for Brian Herring a little bit this year. Smart's just good about keeping people involved in the program. He's going to play, 20-something freshmen from each signing class. He's going to play huge number of players in virtually every single game, even the non-blowouts. Smart finds a way to play a lot of different guys. And ultimately, I think because of that, Georgia's not impervious to the transfer portal. They obviously had a couple high-profile guys leave from this past year's team. But for the most part, they're not going to be quite as vulnerable to the transfer portal as some other programs are because of how liberally Kirby Smart substitutes. And when Brian Herring's name come up at a press conference this week, Kirby Smart kind of went into a little bit more detail about the reasons why, or his feeling that, hey, Georgia's not going to be this program that has a turnstile full of transfers every single season, with it some programs have. But this comment was interesting from Kirby Smart. Take a listen to this.
I don't think you look for greener pastures at Georgia. You continue to work and get better because the green pasture is what the O-line opens up. I mean, they open up green pastures for you to have ability to run, and you're not looking to run away from here and run away from a good physical O-line where you get the opportunity to carry the ball.
Yeah, you're going to get an opportunity. He says eventually the greener pastures aren't somewhere else. They are at Georgia. But when you cultivate that kind of attitude around your program, guys get a chance to play a little bit in every game and eventually a lot once they kind of wait their turn. There is the sort of unfortunate side effect of that, which some of the players that fans want to see more of, they don't get to see as much during games as they might want. And in some games, they might not get to see them quite at all. That's Samir White going back to Notre Dame here for a moment. So Georgia's got a pretty liberal substitution pattern that gets a lot of guys involved in the game a little bit, but doesn't always involve some guys in every game a lot. Does that make sense? White used a good bit against Tennessee, not used much at all against Notre Dame, and that's kind of the flip side of the same coin. On the one side, you're going to play here, and eventually you're going to get your turn in the sun to be one of the lead dogs, especially at the running back position, but there may be some games along the way where you're not playing much at all or not playing as much as you want to. And somehow Kirby Smart's job as coach is kind of navigate both sides of that. And I just shared you the audio of Smart saying, when it comes to waiting your turn, there's no greener pastures than Georgia. But while you're waiting your turn, you may have to stay game ready, even in games where you're not necessarily playing a whole lot. Here's an example from Smart on the other side of that coin.
I think the psychological part of knowing and understanding what my role is in the game, and not every game's the same. I mean, you just don't know. So that's part of being a good football player is I'm ready to go when my number's called. And I tell the guys all the time, because you prepare well in practice doesn't guarantee you'll play. But if you don't prepare well in practice, guarantees you won't.
So listen, I mean, ultimately, I'm not quite sure that one of those ideas is more right than the other. The notion of, well, it's wrong not to play guys like Zamir White as much as fans want to see them, or as much as maybe some of the analysts assume they would see them, by, also saying, well, eventually you're going to get more of your turn in the sun. I'm not quite so sure that one of those ideas is more right than the other, but it is interesting to hear Smart right there kind of articulate both sides of that. If you wait, eventually you'll see that the greenest pastures in college football are right here. But over the course of that time, you may have to deal with some of the personal frustration or some of the psychological toll of knowing that in an individual game, you're not getting used quite as much as you hoped you would. Pretty interesting stuff from Kirby Smart there. All right, well, we'll get ready to wrap up our program here today. And, of course, we'll do so in style by reminding you that with Florida traveling to LSU on Saturday and getting ready after that for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, we could not be more excited and proud to tell you that it's now been 1,076 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. 1,076 days. It's our Gator Hater Updater right here on DawgNation Daily. Also, a couple of pieces of news to take care of. Can I remind you real quick about what we're doing a week from today? Our Marlowe's matchup going to be live at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody starting at 6 p.m. Myself, John Stinchcomb, will be looking ahead that day to the Kentucky game the following Saturday, but probably a little bit of Gator Hater talk mixed in that there as well. So a week from today, October 17th, live at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. And as I said before, speaking of the cocktail party, tomorrow, big announcement from us, something you've been hoping to hear. I think you'll be happy about it. I'll tell you about it then. Thanks for being with us today here on DawgNation Daily. And on a video, good to have all of you with us. If you're just joining us, I did a pretty good run of comments a little early. I've got about 10 minutes to do comments now as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Then we're going to finish the show in kind of a weird way. I'm going to take a guest previewing the South Carolina game, and then after that, we've got to get off the air right away. So that's kind of our deal here for the next little bit. So a big 10-minute run of comments. We took like a half hour's worth a little early. And then from there, a quick guest, David Cloninger, going to preview the game against the Gamecocks, and we are off and running after that. So let's dive in here. I was on Facebook a good bit earlier. Let me go to YouTube here for now. GB2 says, any news on the Bryant injury? I think he means Kelly Bryant, the Missouri quarterback. So Bryant, the quarterback, is going to be fine. Their big injury was the big linebacker, very good linebacker who is now out and not playing. But Bryant's coming back. So, he should be a factor. I think he's going to play even this Saturday against Ole Miss. And then for the Georgia game, the Florida game, the expectation is Bryant's there. And Missouri's getting better right now. So that's a thing. Nicholas King says the LSU offense is scary. And I think right now it is scary. And I think that's one of the reasons why, they're a real threat, I believe, to beat Alabama. In fact, that's what I've picked to happen. I think they're a dangerous opponent for Georgia. I think it's a huge step down for Georgia if it's LSU in the SEC championship game instead of Alabama. I think both those are very, very difficult opponents. There's obviously a little bit more history and backstory with Georgia and Alabama, as we addressed off the top of the program. But LSU is no easy out for Georgia were to play them in the SEC championship either. I have a lot of respect for that LSU offense right now. As predicted at the beginning of the season, they are playing better. Kevin Kennard says, BA, we're a good team now. I'm excited to see this talented team and what it develops into by November. How much development do you expect to see? Boy, I think that's a really good question. So, Kevin, let me kind of run through some areas where I hope to see some of that development. I think right now, and I addressed this earlier this week, you've got two receivers who I think you can really trust in need for more explosive offense. I think Lawrence Cager's come up big for you there. He's moving the chains. He's converting touchdowns. He's catching virtually everything that's thrown to him, and his yards per target pretty high. Kirby wants 12 yards as an explosive play. Cager's yards per target not quite 12, but it's not too far off either. So that's one of the guys you really trust. I think Demetrius Robertson should be the second guy you really trust based on his productivity in comparison to some of the other guys on this team right now. There are certain receivers that if Georgia throws to them, it's missing an opportunity that could have gone to Demetrius Robertson. That's a guy that's rewarding with explosive offense. So as far as your question about how do you see growth and development from Georgia, who can you add to that list of two? For me, it's Cager and D-Rob right now, and my assumption is it's at least one of the freshmen really emerging by the time you get into November, either Pickens or Blaylock. Maybe it's Pickens because of its size. Maybe it's Blaylock because of his overall sort of total package of skill set. There's a chance it's also both. But an area in which you'd like to see Georgia develop is to see at least one of those guys become alongside a Cager and a Blaylock and a Robertson in terms of being the guys that you really think you can move the chains with and really think you can count on for explosive plays. So that's one of those areas I'd like to see that development. And then for the pass rush against higher level Power 5 competition, as I said before, they're pretty close to getting there. They're pretty close to getting home. They're like a second away. Can you defend defensive backs either at the line of scrimmage or just running step for step with them long enough to give this crew of outside linebackers, this crew of front seven guys, just give them one more second. Just give them one more second. You let Georgia get a little bit better in that regard, a little bit better in the explosive pass play offense regard. At that point in time, all of a sudden you're talking about something pretty interesting. Green Soldier, good question. He says, does the offensive line stop South Carolina's strong interior defensive line? Any sacks this Saturday, or do we hold them off? I think that's also something kind of interesting to pay attention to. We had John Stinchcomb come on our program beginning of the season saying he wanted to see more from the Georgia pass protection. And I think, go back and look at the Tennessee game, pretty good example of that being the case. Notre Dame game, I guess, a positive example in that regard as well. So I think the Green Soldier gives you a couple things to identify. One of the areas which Muschamp has done well with recruiting some defensive linemen that Georgia would have liked to have had. Can Georgia hold those guys off? Can it protect Fromm all day long, especially in more obvious passing situations? Now, against an overmatched opponent, maybe Georgia doesn't get into too many obvious passing situations, but I think that Sergeant Green there's got a pretty good eye for what's going to matter on Saturday in terms of how we evaluate Georgia when it's all said and done. Is another day where Fromm's uniform stays clean and he has plenty of time to throw. Because giving him as much time as they did against Tennessee certainly opened up more passing play opportunities, including the big throw to DeAndre Swift, as a for instance. Brian Skelton says Bo Nix was a great example of why we need to pressure the hell out of these young quarterbacks. Got to shake them up early. Yeah, I think that's true, Brian. Young quarterbacks, the more you can confuse them, the more you have a chance to take advantage of what they are likely to do. Nix made a lot of mistakes at Florida, being rattled by the Grantham defense. So you have to say, he has a history of selling out for the pressure, and sometimes that gets you in trouble on the back end, and we all know the history of that. But on Saturday, you probably have to give Grantham some credit for befuddling Nix as much as he did. That's a good point. Elite GB says that we, meaning Georgia, are better now than they were this time last year. I think I probably believe that's true. I do think so. This is around the time last year where Georgia had the ugly game against LSU. Georgia doesn't quite have an opponent like that this year on the road, so we don't really know how the Dogs would fare by comparison in that situation. But to the best that I can offer a prognosis on something, I think that GB's probably right there. I do believe that my hunch is that Georgia's currently better through 5 games and 6 weeks of the 2019 season. They were at the kind of the chronological halfway point of the 2018 season. I think it's probably a fair point. Mike D says, who would you compare Fromm to in the NFL? Tua and Jalen. So the one comparison that comes up the most for Fromm is probably Andy Dalton, the Bengals quarterback. What you hear is on the high end, Drew Brees, who's also never been, a huge deep ball thrower, always been kind of a defense reader, and maybe on more of the median end of things, Andy Dalton. Now you may laugh at Dalton, but Dalton's been a kind of a franchise quarterback, and I define that word as someone his team's not trying to replace. No, Bengals fans aren't saying we've got to get rid of Andy Dalton. Dalton's been a franchise quarterback for the Bengals for quite some time. So that really is the closest comp for Fromm. That's a guy that's going to play at the quarterback level in the NFL for a long, long time. And obviously, Drew Brees is a Hall of Famer. That's more of the positive end of that. I am sure there are some lower-end comps, too, that are probably worth bringing up here. But when scouts talk about this kind of stuff, they have a tendency to sort of favor a top-end comparison. So it's probably a Dalton or a Breeze on the highest of high ends. As far as Tua and Jack and Hurts go, I think that's interesting. You might be tempted to say, well, Jalen Hurts is going to be like Lamar Jackson, but Jackson was a much better thrower at Louisville than I believe that Hurts has been for his college career. Now, Hurts is throwing it around the yard right now playing in Oklahoma, but pretty sure the numbers are going to back me up on that. The Jackson was just a better thrower at Louisville against weaker competition, admittedly. So I don't know that it's fair to say Hurts is a Lamar Jackson. That's the first thing you might want to mention. I think that Lamar is probably a better passing quarterback than Hurts has been to this point in time. The Tua thing's pretty interesting because, one of the things that's pretty good about him when you think about the NFL level is, he doesn't run a ton necessarily. He runs some, but not a ton, but he does a great job of keeping plays alive. And I do know that NFL teams love that athleticism in the pocket. Elite GB, thanks for the kind words. We always appreciate the likes there on the YouTube page. Appreciate that. G. Gray, see, this is what I'm saying. G. Gray says, never compare Fromm to Dalton. He stinks. I mean, Dalton stinks in comparison to, the very best quarterback in the league, the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But, I mean, the Bengals, if you find a quarterback that you're not trying to replace, you've put yourself in a better position than nearly half the NFL. So from that standpoint, it's not an insult to Fromm to say that he's Andy Dalton. Back over here on Facebook, Peter Jeffrey Wilson says, BA, why aren't you having a guest? So if you're just joining us, we're actually about to have a guest. We're like 1 minute away from talking to David Cloninger from the Charleston Post and Courier. Give you a little bit more of a preview for Georgia, South Carolina. So we're going to do that, and we're going to get off the air. So when David is done, we're going off the air for DawgNation Daily today. I realize that's a really weird schedule. Sometimes it ends up working out that way, and that's kind of what it is. Looks like a pretty good comment here from somebody. Let me go ahead and get that. Marcinio Askew says, did you see the article that had UGA ranked 8th? If we're still in the BCS era, what calculations and factors went into that? So in the BCS era, there was a computer component that was 1/3 of that, and maybe that's what's a drag on Georgia right now a bit. But the 2/3 of the BCS formula were the AP poll and the coaches poll. So the idea that the BCS poll was a formula, the truth is it wasn't that much of a formula because the computers were, for the most part, never going to override the human vote. The human vote, coaches and media, was always the biggest part of all of that. So I know that Georgia right now is 8th in SP Plus, for instance. That's that's not really a computer formula. That's a mathematical thing that Bill Connelly does for ESPN.com. So that may be what you're referencing there. And that's based on offensive and defensive efficiency and everything else. Georgia has typically rated pretty high in that kind of stuff. A little earlier in this year, they were 2nd. They were ahead of Clemson, which was 3rd for a while. So maybe Georgia's falling down a little bit in that anyway. But if Conley were here, the one thing you would say is that's strictly based on his numbers, and he kind of protects the full formula, kind of closely. It's kind of a closely guarded secret. But Georgia is 8th this week in SP Plus, and that may be what you're referencing there. But that still puts you kind of right there in the midst of competing for a championship, all things considered. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to get ready to say goodbye to all of you all when it comes to comments, and we're going to get ready to talk to David Cloninger from the Charleston Post and Courier, get a little bit of a preview of the Georgia-South Carolina game on Saturday. David's been covering the Gamecocks, doing a great job for that for a long time. So, in fact, let's go ahead and get ready to welcome him now as part of DawgNation Daily. And it is Georgia, South Carolina in Athens on Saturday, Sanford Stadium. Two coaches that know each other well, two fan bases that know each other well. Should be a fun game. And, of course, David Cloninger covers the South Carolina Gamecocks for the Charleston Post and Courier. He joins us here on DawgNation Daily right now. David, first of all, thank you for spending a little time with us today, and certainly looking forward to seeing you in Athens on Saturday. We appreciate you being here.
Not a problem, Brandon. I'm looking forward to the game myself.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. And I guess let me kind of start with this for a moment. What is the mentality of Gamecocks fans here? I'm curious about that because on the one hand, there was the loss to North Carolina to start the season. Thought South Carolina looked better a couple weeks ago playing against Kentucky. Is there a feeling here that South Carolina with Helinski at quarterback is starting to figure some things out? Is there a growing level of optimism, or is this a fan base that's tired of losing games to begin seasons?
Well, I think there's a little bit of both there, Brandon. You know, I don't think that anybody thought that this year was going to be a stand-up-and-take-notice season just because of how hard the schedule was. And I can tell you that from administration on down, most people thought, 6-6 is probably going to be the benchmark because of that schedule. And everybody would have been fine with that. Not happy, but satisfied with it. So when you lose a game in North Carolina you shouldn't have lost, when you don't show up in a game at Missouri, and those are games that you were counting on to get to 6 wins, well, it gets to be a little concerning. So the Kentucky game was very, very big for confidence and for, how the season's going to go. They got that game. They looked pretty good doing it, and they're obviously coming off a bye week. So they feel pretty good right now, but, coming into this game, they know Georgia's a really good football team, and I think even before the season started, everybody thought USC might be pretty good. No one gave them any chance to win this game. So I don't think that opinion has changed.
Let me talk about a couple of things we might see on Saturday, and a couple themes here in terms of players that South Carolina got that Georgia really wanted. One of those is Ryan Helinski, the quarterback. Kirby has been quite complimentary of Helinski leading this week. It's actually not a surprise to me to see him playing well. Not that I'm a scout, but I did like him a lot as a recruit. And seeing him, kind of have some success leading this Gamecocks offense just isn't that surprising to me, given the fact that I thought he was a pretty college-ready player going back to his senior season of high school. How dangerous does he make this Gamecocks offense by comparison with Jake Bentley? I'm not in Columbia. I'm not watching every snap that South Carolina takes, but, boy, I'm hard-pressed to say that Bentley's obviously better than Helinski based on the way that Helinski's played since Bentley's left games. What's your perspective on that?
Well, Bentley had the experience, and Helinski is never going to get that until he goes out there and plays, and obviously he's getting better with that each and every time he plays. Jake, had a little bit more of the experience. He didn't ever have to double-check a play. He always had to know where to go. The problem is that sometimes he didn't make the greatest decisions. Helinski seems to be making very, very good decisions. Yes, he did throw a really, really bad interception against Missouri that salted that game, but it's not his fault of why USC lost. So he's getting better. There are still some growing pains. He did have a little bit of an elbow issue going into that Missouri game that's cleared up now. But, they don't want to put too much on him to go win any game, not just this one this weekend. They want to be able to lean on their running backs, and they want to be able to, when they turn to Helinski, for him to be able to get the ball to his two best receivers, Brian Edwards and Shi Smith, and let those guys be able to handle it. They really like Ryan. They think he's going to be a star, but they don't want to overwhelm him by going out and getting his head kicked in against a team like Georgia by putting everything on him at this point.
You mentioned the running backs, and I do want to make sure we touch on that in a moment because I'm kind of curious what we could see from them on Saturday. Let me do one more thing before we get there, though. Another example of Muschamp winning some recruiting battles that Georgia would have liked to have won along the defensive line. The most prominent there is Zach Pickens, although the Gamecocks clearly did a good job in recruiting him. Rick Sandage kind of comes up here, too. Georgia maybe thought it had a better chance with Sandage than it did with Pickens, but some interior defensive linemen that Georgia wanted that South Carolina was able to just kind of win those recruiting battles for. How formidable have they made the Gamecocks defensive line this year? And for a Georgia team, and I know you've written about this week, that obviously wants to run the ball, what's the expectation for some of these highly rated recruits in that South Carolina defensive line? Any chance of stymieing that?
Well, you hope so. Those guys have been playing very well this year, and it's because of a couple of senior guys up front there with Javon Kinlaw, who's really having a fantastic season, and DJ Waddle, who got 3 sacks against Kentucky and seems to be having a pretty good year. They've got depth and they've got talent on that line. It's a lot of guys that were here last year, but most of them were hurt, so you didn't get to really see them be able to do what they can do game to game to game. So they know that Georgia's going to run the ball because it's Georgia. That's what they do. They're always going to have a couple of really good tailbacks and probably a third. They're going to make it very difficult for you to slow them down. So they know that they're going to have to stop the run and try to put as much as they can on Jake Fromm to win the game. It's tough to do that because Jake gets the ball out so quick. But if he ever has to throw it 40 or 50 times, maybe you start to see a drop in his productivity. So they know what they're going to have to do, and that's stop Harrigan and Swift and whoever else Georgia can throw at him, and it's up to the defensive line to do it.
So once again, kind of a perspective on South Carolina from afar that may be right, may be wrong, but if I were to kind of sum up one of the issues, it seems like Muschamp's had over the last couple of years, it's finding that running game, not running the ball as well as I'm sure he would like to have. And you mentioned a couple of the names. Obviously, I guess it's Feaster, the Clemson transfer, Rico Daddle, I guess, kind of in the mix here. Is the version of the South Carolina offense that we see on Saturday, are they more adept at running the ball than maybe the last couple of versions of Gamecocks teams that we've seen Georgia play in Columbia last year and Athens the year before that?
Well, absolutely, and it's because they're healthy. Rico Dowdle has always been the most talented running back that Will Muschamp has had. It's just he's been hurt, and he's had some really serious injuries. You know, he had a broken leg. He had a very significant groin pull where he could hardly walk. He's had a major surgery each of the years he's been here at South Carolina. Well, he's staying healthy this year, and as you can see, when he's healthy, he's productive. Maybe that comes from getting a little bit more of a push from a guy like Tavian Feaster. Maybe it doesn't. But when you have those two guys on the field, you can really get the running part of this offense figured out. That's what they haven't been able to do the past 3 years because of injury, and they've had really the same three guys being able to run the ball outside of Tavian Feaster, of course. They just haven't been able to produce as much. So they had that this year, and of course they're coming off a really good game against Kentucky where they did what Will Muschamp always dreams of doing. You run the ball, you stop the run, you're going to have a lot of chances to win a lot of SEC football games. They did that against Kentucky, and they hope to be able to do it against Georgia.
Do Gamecocks fans think of this as a rivalry game? Is this the kind of thing where I mean, as you said before, they don't necessarily think they're going to beat Georgia on Saturday. The Vegas folks have certainly made this a pretty big point spread. But just generally speaking, from the South Carolina side of things, is this the kind of thing that Gamecocks fans still view as a rivalry game?
Oh, sure. I mean, nothing's going to replace Clemson as South Carolina's arch rival, but because Georgia has played USC so much, I mean, Georgia was even on the schedule almost every year when the Gamecocks were still an independent team. So they're close. You know, it's a bordering state. It's a very quick drive from Columbia to Athens. You can get there in under 3 hours going either way. So, yes, they do view this as a rivalry game, and it's usually one of those cases that says, if I had to pick just two games I want to win every year, it's going to be Clemson, and then it's going to be Georgia. Yeah. And, of course, some people say Tennessee because they don't like Tennessee, and some people will say, you know, maybe a Florida just because they don't like Florida. But Georgia has been the most consistent team on their schedule, so, yes, they do view it as a rivalry. And, of course, when the ball coach was here and they won 4 games out of 5 years, that was probably the best it's ever going to get in this rivalry on a South Carolina perspective.
So we'll kind of finish up with this. When we have people from sort of outside the bubble of, you know, UGA on the program, I'm always kind of curious to get their opinion. And you're an interesting person to ask about this because you saw the team you cover, South Carolina, play Alabama. And in preparations for Georgia this week, I guess I'm a little bit curious. You know, for my audience right now, watching or listening, they are dying to see Georgia get over that Alabama hump. Georgia's obviously got major unfinished business when it comes to that kind of thing. And I know you're not watching hours and hours of film the way that coaches are to get ready for a game, but you're certainly preparing for Georgia and to cover that team a little bit this Saturday. So from your vantage point, kind of from the outside looking in on Athens and UGA here, what do you make of the Dogs right now, and kind of how would you make the comparison with some of the teams that Georgia's trying to get over the hump with, including, I guess, the team you see at the end of every regular season, Clemson? What do you make of Georgia by comparison there right now?
I think Georgia's got experience at all the right spots. They got a lot of old guys there who know how to play and play very well. Maybe they haven't played their best ball yet just because their first 5 opponents, really outside of Notre Dame, haven't really given them that kind of challenge. But you saw at how Tennessee came out loaded up and ready to get at them, and Georgia just kind of took it and said, okay, all right. And they got to that point in the second quarter and said, oh, wait, we're better than you. And they started putting down the gas pedal, and that's where they were able to rout that team. I see a little bit of that with Alabama, too. I don't think they've played their best ball yet. And you have to think that if and when Georgia and Alabama meet again, it's not going to be about a talent thing, I don't think. I think it's just going to be, can Georgia avoid that one bad play that's always seemed to dog them against the Tide these past 2 years. So it does need to be a little bit of a mental thing if they get there, but they got to get there first. And I don't think any team, Georgia or Alabama, has really played their best ball yet. Of course, with Georgia in the East, seems like they've got a pretty clear-cut path to the SEC championship game, if they can get that one in Jacksonville, of course. But I don't think Florida is nearly as good as people are making them out to be. I personally see Georgia running the table and getting to Atlanta, and then we'll see who they play, if that's Alabama or not.
Boy, David, it's a real pleasure to preview this game with you for Saturday. I really appreciate your time on our program. And for Dog fans who might want to find out a little bit more about the opponent for Saturday, how can they find you online?
Just check us out at postingcourier.com or on Twitter at DCPNC. I'll have everything from the USC perspective all over that.
David, we'll look forward to speaking to you soon, okay?
Not a problem, guys. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff there, David Cloninger, Charleston Post and Courier. As I said before, once that was over with, we knew we were going to have to get off the air. So we're running a little bit late here today as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Tomorrow we'll have a little bit more of a normal schedule. I know it's kind of weird when we kind of go Pulp Fiction style and do this out of order. But if you want to check out the radio show or the podcast later on, you can hear what it sounds like when we kind of put all the pieces back together where they go. Really fun comments today. We appreciate you sharing all of those. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, you can do so at DawgNation Daily. We can continue the conversation after the show is done. Thanks for being a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Check them out if you have an air, a heating, a plumbing, electric need. They play all those positions for us here at Dog Nation. They can do that for you there as well. They will show up on time, do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's our friends at R.S. Andrews. Find them online at rsandrews.com. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of DawgNation Daily.